Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Stephen Olshansky? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. Stephen Olshansky was born on February 9, 1956, and raised in New Rochelle, New York. At the age of 7, Stephen took an interest in hiking. He frequently hiked on the Appalachian Trail and eventually adopted the trail name The Otter. Eventually, Stephen moved to Boynton Beach, Florida. He worked as a golf professional during the winter and would hike various trails during the summer. He tackled not only the Appalachian Trail, but the Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide Trail. Now moving to the timeline of the incident. In 2015, Stephen hiked on the Continental Divide Trail and stayed with friends in Chama, New Mexico. His friends were named Bill and Jill Whitting. Stephen planned on returning to the trail and hiking south from Cumbres Pass, Colorado, to an area near Ghost Ranch, New Mexico. The route was about 75 miles and involved high elevations, like 9 and 10,000 feet above sea level. On November 14, Stephen's friend Ben dropped him off at Cumbres Pass. Stephen had been using marijuana for a couple of days and was under the influence at the time he started hiking. He was carrying a variety of equipment and supplies, including enough food for 2 weeks and a cell phone, but he was not carrying any type of satellite communicator. He had owned a GPS with an SOS feature on it, but he decided to get rid of it a few months earlier. Stephen did not tell anyone other than Ben where he was going. The only safety feature built into his trip was that Stephen was supposed to call Ben when he arrived at his destination near Ghost Ranch. 15 days later, on November 29, Ben still had not heard from Stephen. Ben posted on a Thru Hiker Facebook page and asked if anyone had heard from Stephen. Family members and friends notified the authorities and reported Stephen as missing. A search effort was launched, but Stephen was not located. No one knew where he was or what happened to him. On April 7, 2016, an experienced hiker named Ian Crombie was at the Lagunitas campground in New Mexico. He went to visit a bathroom at the campground and noticed a message scratched into the paint on the door which read, "Warning." There was a note written on paper stuck to the door which read, quote, "There is a dead human body inside bathroom locked in. It is that of Stephen Olshansky, a.k.a. The Otter. Please notify authorities immediately. No joke. Thank you." Unquote. Ian hiked out of the area and notified the authorities as soon as he could, which was 2 days later. The terrain around the campground was so rugged and the weather was so poor that the authorities could not retrieve Stephen's body until May 15. Among Stephen's belongings were 2 items that revealed information about his trip, a journal and his cell phone containing video. Here's what happened to Stephen based on his writing and what he video recorded. As he was hiking through the Carson National Forest, it started snowing quite a bit. Eventually the snow was up to Stephen's waist. He was having a tremendous amount of difficulty moving through it and keeping his toes warm. In addition, Stephen experienced terrible weakness, but he wasn't sure why. In a cell phone video he recorded on Thursday, November 19, 2015, Stephen said, quote, "I'm in big trouble. I'm snowbound," unquote. He had tried to hike back the day before, but didn't make it far. He returned to his campsite, just barely making it. Stephen realized that he was stuck in his tent. He said, quote, "I made a huge mistake. I should have turned back and never come out here this time of year. I really rolled the dice, and I lost," unquote. He had not given up hope. Stephen noted that he had food, a heated tent, and was trying to figure a way out, although he admitted that he needed a miracle. In the video, Stephen pointed out that he was on the trail and hoped someone riding a snowmobile might find him. Stephen said that Ben was the only person who knew where he was, and that Ben said he would come looking for him if there was no contact. Stephen said, quote, "If he doesn't, I'm toast," unquote. Once again, Stephen acknowledged that his situation was his own fault. In another video, he talked about how he was trying to stay ahead on collecting wood and needed to have faith that something good would happen. Eventually, Stephen realized his options were limited. He believed he had only three choices. Number one, he could remain where he was and hope to be rescued. He was on dry ground there, which was good, but no one had passed by the entire time he was there. Number two, he could assemble makeshift snowshoes and try to hike either east or west. Or number three, he could try to get to the Lagunitas campground, which was about 3 miles to the south. He remembered that there was a 6x6 cinder block bathroom at the campground. Stephen decided that hiking to the campground was his best choice. He departed on December 1 and barely made it to his destination. He used the bathroom as a shelter. Stephen found horse oats in another structure before setting that structure on fire. He hoped that it would be spotted by someone in an aircraft. Stephen also wrote the word help in the snow. Using sheet metal from the structure he burned, he built a pair of makeshift skis. After traveling for about 2 miles using the skis, he ended up returning to the campground. He realized his plan was not going to work. At one point, an airplane flew right over him when he was in the open, but Stephen was not hopeful that he was spotted. His assessment was correct. No one in the airplane spotted him. He spent his days in the cinder block bathroom eating horse oats. Stephen lit his stove in the bathroom, hoping it would burn up all the oxygen, like he no longer wanted to be alive. His strategy didn't work because the bathroom had a lot of air moving through it. Later, Stephen tried another tactic to meet the same goal, but was once again unsuccessful. Stephen was unable to control his own fate. He remained in the cinder block bathroom as temperatures went below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. More snow fell in the area. One of his last journal entries read, quote, "My life is over," unquote. Stephen survived until at least February 2016. The authorities believed that he died from exposure. Stephen was either 59 or 60 years old, depending on the exact day he died. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. Stephen was described as intelligent. He enjoyed playing chess, watching movies, and playing golf. When he was young, he frequently skipped school because he was easily bored. His journal entries before he died revealed how Stephen felt about his place in society. He said, quote, "I never ever fit in, not from 4 years old till now. Nowhere except maybe hiking community," unquote. Stephen claimed that he was bullied in the 5th grade, and this left a terrible scar that never healed. He talked about how, when he was young, he was cut off from a wooded area near his home due to his family moving. Stephen enjoyed spending time in the woods, which contributed to his love of the outdoors. He said, quote, "So unhappy we moved away from the woods," unquote. Drug use was a major part of Stephen's life. He said that when he used drugs for the first time at the age of 16, it was the best thing. It represented the first time he escaped the pain of reality. In one of his cell phone videos, he mentioned how he, quote, "never got along with the system," unquote. There's this sense that Stephen was a bit of a rebel. What does all this information tell us about Stephen's personality? When I conceptualize personality, I use the 5-factor model. I remember the big 5 traits through the acronym OCEAN: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Stephen appeared to be high in openness to experience. He was intellectually curious and liked ideas. Stephen had mid-range to low conscientiousness. For example, he did not prepare well for his trip. His level of extroversion was low. Stephen was analytical and gained energy from being alone. Stephen had mid-range agreeableness. He was willing to be a rebel, but he also made friends. As far as neuroticism, his level was low. Stephen stayed calm under pressure. Even up to his death, he was trying to figure out a way to survive and thinking through his options carefully. Item number 2. As I mentioned, Stephen repeatedly indicated that he was fully to blame for what happened. He took responsibility for his own death. Stephen made several mistakes that led to disaster. Just to name a few, he was not carrying a satellite communicator and had no way to call for help. Stephen started the hike at a time of year which put him at risk for ending up in heavy snow. He was not properly equipped for those conditions. For example, his footwear was not ideal and did not sufficiently protect his toes. Stephen refused to take a map on the trip, even though his friends offered him one before he left. Only one person, Ben, knew where Stephen was, and even Ben didn't know exactly where he was. Stephen had been using marijuana for a couple of days before he left. He said that he decided to go on the trip despite being, quote, stoned on cookies, weed, etc., unquote. Item number 3. When Stephen was not far from death, his final maneuvers revealed a few different themes. He desperately sought to survive by carefully managing his resources and protecting his equipment. He weighed each decision carefully, like the decision to relocate to the campground. At the same time, Stephen was a realist. He knew that a rescue was unlikely. He wanted to regain control of his fate and avoid suffering in the form of attempting to bring an end to his own life, but his plans did not work. This led to a sense that he did not have autonomy. For example, in his journal, he wrote, quote, I'm powerless, getting weaker, unquote. Stephen acknowledged the finality of death and the many implications that come with it. He made statements like, this is so intense and sad, boy do I have regrets, and no opportunity to change things, very sad. Stephen wanted to spend his last days focusing on the beauty and good things that were in his life, especially his friends. He wrote kind messages to them before dying. Unfortunately, the last several weeks of his life were spent in agony, both physically and mentally. Stephen had a lot of time to reflect on the mistakes that led him to being in a lethal situation. He took responsibility directly, but he also took responsibility in a more general sense. He ventured away from the specifics and attributed his death to a global cause when he said, quote, this is a situation of my own doing from a life I led, unquote. I think he was right about the first part, but not about the second part. Stephen died because he didn't prepare for the trip and made the journey at a dangerous time, not because of decisions he had made years earlier. His death wasn't a punishment for living a bad life. One could argue that in a wider sense, his death could be attributed to his reluctance to be around people. But again, the specific decisions he made right before the trip cost him his life. Item number 4. What lesson can be learned from Stephen's situation? Often with these cases where people die in the wilderness, there is a desire to find some greater meaning to the journey and the outcome. Like there must be some type of positive takeaway. I think the lesson here is that the desire to find a greater meaning is a worthy pursuit, but sometimes the explanation is simple and concrete. I believe that Stephen was despondent and was searching for a more nuanced and complex explanation as he was struggling with an existential crisis. In reality, the factors that led to his death were straightforward and 100% avoidable. Philosophical explanations are wonderfully complex and artistic, but not always accurate or helpful. I think the lesson learned in this case is to be prepared when engaging in dangerous activities or avoid these activities entirely. Long-distance hikers like Stephen may have philosophical reasons for taking these long trips in isolation, but that doesn't change the laws of physics or biology. If they want to survive, a good origin story will not be helpful to them. It is more logical to focus on practical items, like survival gear and communication devices. Now moving to my final thoughts. There is a sad irony evident in this case. Stephen spent his life upset with people because he was bullied and ostracized. He was pushed away by society. His response was to take off into the wilderness and spend time alone. During the weeks leading up to his death, that dynamic turned around, and Stephen desperately wanted to open a dialogue with those who rejected him. Now they represented his only hope to be saved, but Stephen once again was unable to connect with society. He once again felt abandoned, rejected, and alone. Those are my thoughts in the case of Stephen Olshansky. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.